Welcome to the Simple Podcast. I'm Todd C. Slater, the Simple Investor, with my Friday recap. You know what? What happened big in Canada this week? That's right. We had the G7 meeting. And you know, it's funny because typically the G7, you would think that there was 7 countries that were going to show up, and happens to have, we've got some of the leaders that did show up for this meeting. You know, it's interesting that there was a few extra leaders thrown into the mix. And yes, if you recognize one gentleman there in the front row, that is Zelensky from the Ukraine. He did show up. And of course, you know, instead of a goodie bag, what happened? Well, Prime Minister Carney decided to give him $4.2 billion as a little contribution. Now, I'm just wondering if that was in a bag, or was it a check, or how it was delivered. But, you know, this is not what the G7 is supposed to do. We're not supposed to be handing out money. And if you take a look at the photo, you know, there is one person missing. You almost want to say, where's Waldo? Well, I'll tell you, he's a lot smarter than Waldo, but President Trump did show up, and it's amazing how Prime Minister Carney was elected for him to take on President Trump. But quite frankly, that bombed. In fact, I don't think that President Trump has been put on a bigger pedestal by any world leader than what Prime Minister Carney did for him. But you know what? President Trump's a pretty busy guy. He wasn't going to go hang out in the Rockies with everybody, so he bolted as soon as he did what he needed to do. He made his appearance, and then he was off. Now, speaking of off, what's happening right now with Canadian buyers in the United States? Well, you know what? There's a big noticeable difference right now that Canadians aren't really gravitating towards U.S. real estate, to the fact that there's a lot of realtors down in areas such as Florida, California, and they're saying, hey, look, the Canadian valve has been turned off. And a lot of people are sitting there saying, why? Well, of course, why would it? You know, with all the political strife that's happening right now, and, you know, again, self-inflicted by Canada to a certain degree. I know a lot of people aren't going to agree that, you know, if Trump is putting forth tariffs. But had we negotiated and got everything kind of squashed right away, we wouldn't be feeling the pain. Now, there's a lot of other pain points that we need to talk as Canadians, and why people are not investing in the U.S. right now. Again, the Canadian dollar sucks. You know what? It hasn't been strong for quite a while. Our unemployment number is going up. People are concerned about their pensions. They're concerned about the Canadian future right now. And we've had a really rough spring when you think about, you know, who's going to be running the country. In fact, we didn't have anybody running the country for probably the better part of 6 months to almost a year. I hazard a guess probably 10 years, but you know what? I'm going to be short with that one and say, look, it probably lasts 6 to 12 months. We haven't seen it. So as Canadians, you know what? Most of us have decided to pull back and watch what we're spending, because we don't know what's going to happen next in Canada. So when we talk about, you know, U.S. relations, and we talk about U.S. real estate, as Canadians, you're a foreign buyer, and you got to remember that. And as a foreign buyer, you can't always get financing. So you have to come down with more cash when purchasing real estate. So are all Canadians that strong? They're just going to walk in and perhaps, you know, drop $200, $500, $1 million on real estate in the U.S. just so they can go down for 6 months of the year? This is the thing. Right now, it makes sense for Canadians to pull back. Moving forward, we could probably anticipate that there's going to be some decent deals. And if there is, I think you'll see the Canadian market rebound, where the Canadians are going to go back and say, look, we like living in the U.S. part-time, you know, who knows, quarter of the year, half the year. Some of them might even, you know, immigrate down to there and live there. So again, right now, as far as U.S. real estate, yeah, Canadians aren't buying, but you know what? Not surprising. Where are Canadians going to buy? Well, right now we've seen several provinces staying strong. And I know a lot of the naysayers out there saying, well, okay, if you're not spending abroad, where are you spending? Well, we're watching Alberta get pretty strong. And you know what? This is important, because when we see investment moving around the country and staying in the country, that's a positive. Now, a lot of businesses have, you know, since left the country, and hopefully they can be attracted back. We're going to have to wait and see. That's going to be a long time play, and we'll wait and see what's going to happen. But right now, Canadian real estate, East Coast, Alberta, fairly strong. These are the areas that are going to be, you know, I think see the growth over the next 12 to 18 months. And quite frankly, I think once Ontario stabilizes, we get our employment numbers under control, we get our immigration numbers under control, and we start taking a look at some downturn in interest rates, you're going to start seeing Ontario start to rebound a little bit quicker than anticipated. The one thing I can tell you is this: knowing how the real estate market works, the average Canadian wants to get into the market. They only put their hands in their pockets for so long. We saw that with the interest rates. And as soon as the interest rates started to bump down a little, you could see people wanting to come back into the market. And again, too soon to tell. Yeah. Are we going to be in for a little bit of a long haul? We will. But, talking to our U.S. neighbors, don't worry. Canadians aren't going anywhere. They're going to be back buying the real estate. We are your biggest buyers of what we would call foreign buyers. And remember, when the Americans come up to Canada, they're also foreign buyers. And one of the things that happened was that Canada restricted foreign buyers over the last several years. So, you know what? Tit for tat. We'll wait and see. Anyways, love to hear your comments. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Todd C. Slater with my weekly update.